Now, I certainly was not expecting this, but it seems DJI have launched a new firmware update for the DJI Mini 2. This is firmware 01060000, and it is optimizing flight safety. Now, this release note is about as useless as a chocolate teapot, so in this video I'm going to go through everything and investigate exactly all the main features that I feel are important to you to figure out whether you should install this update or not, or indeed stick with the version you currently have. So let's get into it. So all the tests I'm going to perform on this video was all performed on this same day at the same time with one simple screen recording. Case of turning the drone on, performing a bunch of tests on the old firmware, landing the drone, updating the firmware, restarting everything and putting the drone back up in the air and testing the exact same things. One thing to mention is after every full firmware update, some of your advanced safety settings will reset. So all you need to do is pop into the DJI Flight app menu and just check your return to home altitude. You will see certain parameters such as the maximum distance allowed will have also changed, but of course that is just something for you to be aware of. Some other camera settings might have changed, such as the DJI Mini 2 when it's got its little LED light on the front. Again, that will go back to the original and it'll go back to breathing or beating or whatever the hell it is. I like mine on yellow because it matches the channel colours, and of course I have it on solid, but just an example of simple things you will have to reset after this has had a firmware update. So first of all, we are going to get straight into the biggest one I think you will have an issue, and that is of course range and signal performance. So let's just put this flight on screen and very quickly explain why I do these tests. Now, many of you in the past have complained and say, oh, we don't like seeing tests in residential areas. Look, this is as simple as what I can make it. Car manufacturers, when they do their crash tests, do not crash their cars into cardboard boxes, and it is the exact same when I do my flight tests with the DJI Mini 2 or whatever drone it is. I want to do a signal test in a high interference area where I expect the drone to fail and basically see how well each one does. Now, the flight on the top is the new firmware version, the flight on the bottom is the old one. And what we're basically looking for is a controlled environment to make sure that there is no discrepancies between the two. As you can see, a little later on in the flight, we do get a disconnection on both of them, and we get a disconnection at pretty much the exact same point. Now, just to allay some of your fears, do not look at the distance and go, oh, that's not going very far, because at the end of the day, I know there is a bit of a black spot here. I've done a flight test many times in this location. For some bizarre reason, I always get a disconnection on the DJI Mini 2. However, just to give this a little bit more context, I have also done this very same flight with the DJI Mini 3 Pro this morning, okay, at the same time as these, to basically show that, you know, my findings when everybody was complaining when the DJI Mini 3 came out, that there was no real flight performance difference between the two. And as you can see, the DJI Mini 3 also cut out at the exact same point. When it does come to the signal strength and signal performance, there is absolutely no difference between the DJI Mini 2 on the latest firmware compared to the old one, or indeed it performs absolutely comparable to the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and given the fact that that's running OcuSync 3.0, yep, I think that's quite a positive test. Now, one of the things I do also like to test is how quick you can get this drone up in the air, and by that I mean how quickly it is picking up satellites. Now, in all fairness, when I first turned this drone on in this location on the old firmware, it did take a hell of a long time. I don't have the time while I'm recording this video, but I will pop a little sort of message here somewhere as to how long it actually took. However, when we did actually update the firmware, now bearing in mind many of you will say, yes, but it's already cached everything because you've already turned it on in that location. Yes, you may have a point, but don't forget we've had a full firmware update and the RC controller as well, so everything would have reset. And I'm pleased to say that on the new latest firmware update 01060000, this did really pick up satellites a huge amount quicker than what it did on the old firmware, so that is a huge positive again. Now, sometimes when DJI launch a new feature, for example within the DJI Flight app, quite often you will need to update the drone's firmware to allow it to be able to happen, essentially. Now, as you can see in the firmware notes, there isn't really anything to tell us there's anything new, and of course flicking through all the menus, testing all the features whilst actually on the ground, you can of course see there was absolutely nothing new for this drone at all, so I can quickly put that to bed. As much as we always like new features on drones, I have to say that, you know, as much as I think this is an absolutely fantastic piece of kit, and it is still one of the best drones you can use out there in the right hands, of course DJI will be sort of ending its life in terms of the product development, if you wish. Don't forget, we've also got the Mini 3 Pro and the DJI Mini 3 that have come out since this drone, so it's very unlikely we're going to see any new huge features as much as I would really like them to be. So now, but at this stage, we already know that the signal is perfectly fine, especially comparable to the last version and the DJI Mini 3 Pro. We're picking up satellite, so we can get in the air absolutely perfectly fine and quicker than what I could do on the previous firmware version. And we've established that we've got no new features, which is, of course, perfectly fine and understandable for a drone of this age. So the last thing we need to do is put the drone up in the air then, and basically make sure that the drone actually flies as it should, and make sure that everything is working exactly perfectly. So that is, of course, what I've done. Of course, what I like to do on my tests is I always like to perform some simple quick shots, make sure that everything is being selected correctly, and don't get me wrong, initially I did have a bit of an issue, and this issue carried over from both firmware versions, so I can just put it down to the circumstances, the environment on this particular day. For some bizarre reason, it just wasn't selecting the subject. When I tried to execute the quick shot, it was just cutting out and stopping. However, moving location and selecting a new subject, I did eventually get it to work, which basically showed that it was more of a matter of circumstance and the location and everything else, rather than the fact that the feature wasn't actually working as it should. Now, testing video modes, photo modes, everything works absolutely fine. Let's take a nice simple photo, and a new feature of the DJI Flight app that was introduced a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now actually, was the fact that if you take a photo then go into your gallery, it will automatically download that photo straight into your phone gallery without having to manually download it. Pop into my phone gallery, and all the photos and videos that I've already downloaded are, of course, still in my phone gallery to be able to just edit and share as I wish to do. Another new feature that was introduced within the DJI Flight app that you may not be aware of if you didn't see my previous videos is the fact that if you do take a panorama shot, we can now execute that. I'll just speed up this footage to make it nice and simple, and then once we've completed that, for example, what we can now do is we've got this new preview within the DJI Flight app where we can select what preview we want. We can have a good play around, and we can basically look at the work we've actually achieved within the DJI Flight app with this nice new menu. We've got various menus as well and various views, and I just think that's a really nice feature that DJI have introduced. So I do know many of you have commented positively about this, but I just wanted to run a quick one and just make sure that this was all working correctly as it should do, and of course it absolutely is. Now, one thing I did notice with this DJI Mini 2 is something I actually established when DJI launched the Mini 3 Pro. Now, something that did actually concern me on this flight is when it did come to signal quality and signal strength. You see, even though if we look on our transmission tab and if we compare it to what we did previously where we did lose connection, for some bizarre reason this drone just did not want to flick over to the 5.8 GHz frequency, which I personally think would have been a better frequency for flying in this high interference area. Now, no matter how many times I lost signal, lost connection, it still remained on that 2.4 GHz frequency, which is really not ideal in my own personal opinion. And just for reference, if I put the screen recording from the DJI Mini 3 Pro, which is I've also done this morning at the same time as the flight of this one, you can see that as we're flying along, the transmission tab is actually flicking between 2.4 and 5.8 to basically ensure that it gets the strongest signal possible, and that's exactly what this DJI Mini 2 should have been doing. I did actually do 3 flights and emptied 3 full batteries, so I have tested this quite extensively really, but at no point did this ever flick over to 5.8, whereas of course, as I've just mentioned, the DJI Mini 3 Pro actually did, and I see that as a huge positive for the Mini 3 Pro, and I'm not entirely sure if DJI have changed anything, but it certainly wasn't doing what I would expect it to do when it comes to the OcuSync 2.0. And last but not least, I like to always perform a return to home test. Now, this is where I did suffer some very unexpected results, and I just want to make you aware of this. However, I may add right at the beginning that this result was not exclusive to the DJI Mini 2. You see, if we look on apps such as UAV Forecast or AirData UAV, you can see the KP index is very low. So I would basically not expect the drone to struggle when it did come to the return to home positioning or its actual GPS location. However, when I was trying to get the drone to return to home, so many times it just was absolutely, at some point about I don't know, 6-7 meters away from where I actually took off. Now, bearing in mind, the DJI Mini 2 does not have precision landing, but usually it gets within about a meter. But on this scenario, on this day with this drone, it was just coming nowhere near. I repeated this test a good 3 to 4 times, and at no point was this drone ever going to land even remotely where it took off from. It was absolutely miles away. There were plenty of times it was going to land on the roof, which of course I had to stop it. But in the interest of fairness, and not to mention that this is a problem, for some bizarre reason, when I did repeat it, again, all for testing and context, with the DJI Mini 3 Pro, I got exactly the same result. So even though the forecast was saying the KP index was low, I was certainly struggling with the return to home positioning, which of course reinforces something that I've always said on this channel, that you use the return to home feature as a safety feature only, and as soon as your drone is back overhead in perfect plain sight and you have got a full signal, you should always cancel that return to home and land the drone manually. Now, I am a little bit late with this update video. I've had a huge amount going on in my own personal life, so I do apologise because many of you have been asking for this video. However, we've now done the test, and as far as I'm concerned, there is no real reason not to update to the latest firmware. I found no particular bugs over and above the circumstantial ones which I've already mentioned, but of course always backed up by the fact that the DJI Mini 3 Pro performed exactly the same in the areas with which this did struggle. Some positives: signal is perfectly the same as I've already mentioned. The satellite signal seems to be pick up a little bit quicker actually, so that's again always positive. And it was always interesting, really, no sniping towards anybody, but normally when I'm quick to do these updates there is a huge flood of them all over YouTube, and the fact that I did actually do a little, I don't ever watch anybody else's videos, I must admit, but I did do a little search before publishing this video just because I was a little bit late to the party posting this video and there's basically no one else has done it. So just take a little look to see that now I've done mine, does anybody else actually now start to publish their update videos on the DJI Mini 2? But guys, that does wrap up this video. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, as always, if you did like this video, hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you're awesome, and until next time, see you again soon.